Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so excited to welcome you all to the 12th Annual Athena Film Festival. My name's Umbreen Bhatti. I'm the Constance Hess Williams 66 Director of the Athena Center for Leadership, longest title ever. But super thankful to Connie for her vision and support of the center. This festival is a joint initiative between Barnard and Women in Hollywood. It's been a really wonderful partnership these past dozen years. And the festival is dedicated to celebrating the stories of bold and courageous women leaders and the filmmakers who bring those stories to life. So thank you so much for joining us. The festival wouldn't be possible without the sponsors, so I want to give a shout out to our original sponsor, our founding sponsor, the Artemis Rising Foundation, and their CEO and founder, Regina K. Scully. So thank you, Regina, for your visionary leadership. To all of our sponsors, you'll see their names before all of the films if you catch any of the films. Thank you for challenging our culture to be more inclusive and inspiring audiences in the process. So make sure you get tickets for any of the remaining in-person events. Make sure you catch any of the things that are streaming at home. And to all the folks who are watching at home, warm and cozy, lucky you. And I'm excited that you're here as well. So without further ado, I'm really excited to kick off this panel, which is called Thinking Beyond the Binary, Should Gendered Categories Still Exist? In this panel, we'll explore moving beyond the binary, the importance of representing everyone, and the implications of removing gendered categories. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Lisa Kenny, CEO of Reimagine Gender. Lisa, over to you.
Thanks, Umbreen. Thanks to everyone who's watching at home. I mean, I'm just going to say I'm sitting in my cozy house instead of bearing this winter weather, but we miss you here, but we're glad for those that are here and glad for those that are watching at home. So I have my little cheat sheet here because I could talk about gender for hours and hours and hours, but I understand that's not what we're doing today, or at least that's not what we're planning. So what I want to do is start with introductions, and Kia, maybe we could just start with you.
Sure, that sounds great. Hi, I'm Kia Brooks. I'm the Deputy Director of the Gotham Film and Media Institute, formerly AFF, the Independent Filmmaker Project. The Gotham is a nonprofit that supports film and media creators. We provide resources, access to industry, as well as pathways to wider recognition. Sorry, we just rebranded, so I have to say the new thing. But, you know, pathways to wider recognition leads into the Gotham Awards, which is part of what I'll be here to speak about. But I've been with the Gotham for about 7 years, so I oversee all of our programming, all of our communications, and I support on development. And previous to working at the Gotham, I was a film publicist for 6 years, so I also have the PR side of this as well.
Thanks, Kia.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mars. I'm an artist, dancer, musician. I've been on Broadway. I'm going to be on Broadway again in this new musical called Strange Loop in about a month, opening. Yeah, I'm a trans actor, trans artist, genderqueer artist. Yeah, a little bit.
Thanks, Mars.
Hi, my name is Bliss Griffin. My pronouns are she, hers. I am an entertainment industry inclusion consultant. 9 to 5, I lead the diversity department at the Actors Equity Association with the Stage Actors Union, although I do not speak on behalf of that organization today. I started my career as an actor and a stage manager, and you know, I got pretty fed up with the degree of inequity that I saw around me, and I thought, how do we start solving that problem in sustainable ways from a business strategy and legal approach? And then how do we also make sure that sociology is at the center of what we do? How do we make this industry that believes itself to be so inclusive actually measurably, quantifiably inclusive? So that's what I do.
Thanks, Bliss. I appreciate it. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have this conversation today with our esteemed panelists and just explore gender in the industry and specifically using the gendered awards that still continue in certain award shows to look at some of the issues that are really important. Now, because we only have an hour and not the 2 or 3 days that we could use, we won't go into certain topics, including the topic of, you know, like, should cisgendered actors play characters who are gender diverse and those kinds of issues, that deserves its own conversation. So we're not going to try to lump everything in today, but we're certainly going to explore some of the issues around gender that the awards shows really represent. So we're going to begin that. It is just a conversation, so you know, we're not debating. There is no right or wrong answer, but I thought we would start maybe with the question that we have in our name of our panel, which is, should gendered categories still exist? Kia?
No.
No, okay. Mars?
I believe no, coming from my personal perspective, but it's all based in like what your personal politic is around awards, because I feel like awards can be like super oppressive and completely omit groups of people, marginalized people who are great. People can be great and not win the award, and people can be great and not be nominated or thought of. So coming from that perspective, it's a no. If you're asking like a business answer, I don't know what that answer is, but personally, I believe no. I don't think it serves anything.
Okay, thanks, Mars. Bliss?
Yeah, so I'm outvoted here because my answer is yes, and I think that until we actually live in a society that is truly inclusive and where there are not people on the margins, that having specific carve-outs for those who are held away from power and influence and all of those things is an important check on the biases that are like 400 years deep in our society. So I say yes, and because there's no way that gendered awards categories can do all of that work. There's a lot of other work that has to happen around it. But until we actually are who we want to be, we need to keep looking at those things.
All right. Well, it's good to have a difference of opinion. I thought maybe if we were all going to end up on no, we'd be done. But, you know, I guess we'll just keep the conversation going. So let's talk about representation, because that's one of the issues. And Mars, I'm looking at you in part because I think that one of the key, you know, reasons people want to keep this is this fear. And I think, again, there's legitimate fears here, so we want to acknowledge that if we don't have these gendered categories, that we're going to miss something, that we're going to you know, it's just going to be populated by cisgendered men, and we're not going to see the performances just because of the biases that the Bliss that you were just referring to. Of course, representation is a tricky thing, right? So who gets represented, who's included, who's excluded, and why? And I think it's interesting that one of the conversation, that this is an argument that has been both for and against is representation, because it's exactly what gender diverse actors are saying is, yes, representation, exactly. So we're not in those categories. And I think the women who are concerned about representation of women are concerned about that too. So I would love to just start with you, Mars, a little bit in that this is your life we're talking about. This isn't an academic subject. It's not a political thing. It is your life. And so I'd love to start with what you see in terms of representation. What are some of the issues that you want to see addressed?
Okay. First off, I realized I did not say my pronouns. My pronouns are they, them. After that, I feel like I don't necessarily believe in representation politics. I feel like because people believe or they see a certain, like, I'll speak from the Black perspective. Like, they'll see Black actors and they're like, okay, well, now you are no longer oppressed, and because you are on television and you have a role and are getting paid this, this, and this, that, you know, it's all good. And I feel like, you know, speaking, I'm on Broadway, like, I am on Broadway, I've been on Broadway in a role before, and I could not be nominated for a role because I do not identify with a man or a woman. I'm on Broadway, but, you know, the representation isn't really doing much about the marginalizations and oppressions that I'm dealing with systematically within Broadway and outside of Broadway. So I don't necessarily believe, while I think it's important for young kids to see themselves on television, there aren't many people who I see like me on television or in these certain spaces. And while being in these spaces, we have to discuss how these oppressions are still existing, whether it's work-wise or whether it's quite literally life and death systematically, like out in the world. Those are my opinions on representation politics.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one of the conversations that's come up as we've all talked about is that like I'm Iranian, and when I think about representation, I mean, the options available are basically terrorist 1, terrorist 2, mother of the terrorist, girlfriend of the terrorist. It's always the same role all the time. Now, that still might be 10 roles in a movie. Does that actually mean representation in the way that we're talking about it, right? So I think that's a really important thing to remember, though. But when you say that issue, though, that here you are on Broadway, amazing performance by all accounts, and yet there'd be no place to recognize you for that performance is something I think all of us just on a human level can really feel.
I feel like, again, like this does not upset me because I am non-binary, so I am not centering binaries in any way, whether it be television, like whether it be awards, like that doesn't feel like it highlights so much of, I mean, we don't have best ensemble. Like there's just so many things that are being omitted outside of gender and awards that I just feel like is not, I don't know, I'm not really like a huge awards person, you know what I mean? Like it's just not.
I'd still like him to give you one. I'm just going to go on record.
But it's
saying
like,
that.
for people who do care, should have the ability to be recognized while sitting in who they are. Like trans people should be able to be recognized and nominated for awards. If that's something that you care about, it shouldn't be something that you have to decolonize and not care about because you know you're not going to be involved in the question or the narrative at all.
Yeah. You know, can I ask you a quick follow-on question about that? About the lived experience. So you were in a Broadway play. You're about to be in another one. You're open about who you are in all aspects, including your gender. What is that relationship like these days in terms of, you know, you're part of a team and there's a lot of power dynamics, and so I'm just curious how you've tried to navigate that.
I would say I am inevitably in spaces and in rooms where I have to be the teacher of my existence because there's one or two, you know, in the space. Most people around me haven't done or really wanted to do any work around decolonizing gender in their lives, to an extent maybe. So it's either I'm going into a space where people are open and willing to learn about their own marginalizations or who they are and how that affects people like me, or they aren't, and it becomes explain how you are real and explain when this became a thing and make your existence real to me. Yeah. Recently, not even recently, in the last I think when pandemic happened, and we're still in pandemic, but when we were in the house all day, I felt like I did a lot of work to understand my boundaries about where I would sit in that. When I was younger, it felt like, okay, well, I have to be the person to answer these questions because what if they go to the next trans person and end up being violent to them? So I'll be the first space and then they'll learn. And now I'm like, I do not have the capacity to be a learning space. There's books, there's Google, there's TikTok. You know, TikTok has there's a lot of ways to easily access information that requires active consensual work on your part versus trying to non-consensually get non-paid work, unpaid work out of me to explain and make sense of trans and genderqueer people.
Thank you. So I'm curious, Kia, the next question is going to be for you. What we know from the research that's out there, first, the millennials were the first generation that didn't see gender in the binary. Gen Z folks have accelerated that, and so when people keep talking about we're going to be looking or gender is going to change, it has been changing and it's accelerating quickly. So at the Gotham, you all are faced with that. You've always been committed to inclusion as part of what you're about. Was there a tipping point that sort of caused this issue to sort of say, yeah, you know what, we're going to deal with this right now? Or was it just sort of an ongoing conversation that finally you just thought, yeah, today's the day?
Yeah, I mean, as what you just pointed out, we've always been an organization that's thought about inclusivity, and when it comes to the Gotham Awards, we had a breakthrough actor category for quite some time, so we already were making those strides or thinking about that for a while. And this year just felt like, as I said, we've rebranded. We're in a position to kind of rethink a lot of what we've been doing, and not only at the Gotham Awards, but as an organization overall. And so it felt like this is the time to make this change. And as we've talked about, you make a change, you don't know what the final results are going to be, but the fact that we're stepping out is, to me, a sign of progress because we're thinking about that. And for us, when we decided, so essentially, we had the breakthrough actor category, we added a lead performance category, a supporting performance category, and then a supporting TV it's like so many words, something like supporting new TV series category, where now there's 10 nominees per those categories. That's increasing the number of people that have access to, win an award at the Gotham Awards. Before, when it was more close to like 15, now it's 30. It's a accelerated amount. So I think that it gave us an opportunity to recognize more performances in a way that is more inclusive, and again, continues the work that we've already been doing.
And I'm curious, is there some conversation at Gotham about, okay, we are in the beginning of this. We don't know where it's going to end. How are you looking for feedback, or how are you incorporating that? Is there any sort of process that you're using to try to see what this is creating on its own and then make any changes that you want to do? Or what is your process? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, we've, again, also our awards have always thought about, juries, I think, in a very intentional way. So we very much trust our jury to make these decisions. And it's, a compilation of different people, and it's about transparency and being clear of who's on the jury and thinking about representation when it comes to the jury. So I think, it was year one. And what was interesting is for the lead and supporting, we actually gave 2 awards per category. So that's going to be, I think we're tracking, like, is that going to happen? Our jury's going to say, no, it's not just 1 out of 10. We actually want to give 2. Maybe they'll say, maybe there'll be weird days where they'll be like, let's give 3. Like, who knows? I think we're just very open, and we want to see where it leads because it's so early, and there's not as many organizations doing that right now. So there's no lead to follow. It's kind of like we're setting our own tone.
And I'm curious, when they came back with 2 awards, in each case, was it a male and a female?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's part of the process, right? I mean, it's sort of interesting.
Well, I think it's also like changing people's, the jury's used to giving
that's right.
those awards. So what does that also mean? And what does that mean too, again, thinking about transparency and jury, like is how we've been doing juries, right? Should we be rethinking who's on juries? It's opening up a lot of new doors, which are kind of scary, but also very exciting to see kind of where it goes.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's progress, right? And part of progress is the learning and exploring and seeing where things go. And it takes a while. Mm-hmm. Bliss, one thing I would love for you to talk about is that for so many of us that are on the consumer part of entertainment, television and film and otherwise, I'm curious, I spend most of my time working with corporations who are dealing with this. We know, again, from data, and I am a lover of the data, I have to say, we know from the data that diverse organizations and diverse teams outperform, not by a little, but by a lot. So corporations care about this a lot. But we forget, as consumers of entertainment, that this is also a business, right? So you're managing and you're working with organizations all the time and trying to help them see this. One of the things I see from companies is a desire for them to not be open and transparent now. They want to be open and transparent when they look better. And who doesn't want that, right? I mean, everybody wants to put their best foot forward. Part of the power, though, is just naming sort of where you are and showing how collectively, right, we're trying to make this progress. I'm curious if you can talk about this a little bit from the business side of things, what you hear in terms of, you've got an industry that needs to have a healthy pipeline coming in to handle all of the sources of whether it's Broadway or whether it's, film or television or whatever it is, especially with all the new media like streaming and the amount of content. What do you see as where the industry needs to go? Where do we get to transparency and accountability? And have you seen any models or examples that you think, here's an interesting thing they're doing? It may not be a final answer, but it's an interesting thing to try.
I honestly, I don't know if I've seen any final answers. I think the important thing to do is to understand that having a diverse workplace, having an inclusive workplace, one where it's very easily accessible and people feel belonging there, not only does it drive your value, but it is a strategic activity, right? This is something that you can plan for and design for and invest in, and see and measure change over time. But if you're not willing to take a baseline, if you're not willing to look yourself right in the mirror and see what's going on here, not only in terms of representation, right? What demographics do we have on this boat with us, but also getting a sense of what the qualitative experience for people is like, and then measuring that, seeing where the trends are. It turns out that 80% of the people with X identity in this organization are ranking us really low on the Likert scale for this thing, right? That tells us that we have a long way to go in terms of belonging. Oh, looks like 5% of our organization is Y marginalized identity. So we can't even tell if we have diminished sense of belonging from people that are systemically marginalized, because we, like most of the rest of the society that we've been living in, have held them outside too. And so I think that we have to start valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the same way that we value the finances, right? If you accidentally order any video on any platform, right, $2.99 to Amazon on your corporate card, you're gonna hear from finance. In less than 30 days, you will hear from them. $2.99, because we understand that the money matters. Because somewhere we understand that this is a business that's intended to create more value so that it either can go in our pockets or be invested back into the organization. So my litmus test is, are you tracking and measuring this? The metrics matter. I think that we tend to shy away from that activity because it is, it's personal, right? Any organization is, right, it has an entity of itself, but it's just a collection of people. It's a society with its own values. So when you start looking at how well or poorly your organization is doing in terms of inclusion and belonging, what you're actually looking at is a reflection of the values of its highest leaders, whether they're values that they are cognitively aware of or they're subconscious values, which are a major part of our decision making, even though we don't necessarily know it. So I think the reason that we tend to lean toward, oh, well, let's just not talk about it, let's take the categories away, is because it allows organizational leaders to not look in the mirror and do the hard self work, right? Diversity and inclusion comes home in a way that's really challenging. So I haven't really seen a model that I'm super excited about, but exactly the kind of things that Kia was talking about. Expand the pool. Be mindful of who's voting. Have you taken the time to make sure that your voters for awards have had a conversation, they're doing their own self-work and identifying their biases? One of the, hazards that come along with doing what I do every day is that I am walking around in the world always having a thought and checking it. Which bias did that come from? Right. Is that fair? right? Or like, are you having a fair thought, or are you having a thought that's based on a stereotype? Or like, are you kind of mean because you didn't eat today? Are we training the people that make these major decisions, not only about who the award goes to, but how is it structured, to get very comfortable navigating these issues, right? And we tend to want to be perfect. Perfect's not going to do it. Open to learning and growing, and being wrong and recovering fabulously is how we make that change over time. And I see things like the Oscars is talking about having certain standards for being eligible to be nominated. I think that we have to look with a very critical eye at these things, right? In the same way that we have to look with a very critical eye at the way gender categories are now. Sure, that may have been a device for creating more inclusion, but it's at the end of the road. It's not at the beginning of making the art in any way. So what power does that have to change people's lived experience in the workplace? It's also not holistically successful because we don't have best female director, best male director, right? So acknowledging that, like, we tried a thing and it was half-baked, but it was strong for what we were doing however long ago, and be willing to iterate it. So when I look at, what the Oscars are proposing in terms of standards for being eligible, I literally think, okay, how do these puzzle pieces actually go together? We do a lot of this stuff in theory. Stop doing it in theory. In specific context. If I want to tell X story, how would I cast that? How would I hire it to make myself eligible through these things? Is there a way to get through this gauntlet of new standards and still have a totally white supremacist, cis, male supremacist workspace? Yes. So let's be glad that we put our nose to the grindstone, iterate it. We're not there yet.
And yet, to your point, the standards might get us down a path that allows for that kind of learning, right? That we only develop best practices by practicing.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the challenges, is that we just want to do it perfect out of the gate, as if that's something is possible, but in fact it's not. And I'm curious, the thing about the categories is also interesting to me too, in that I think in some ways, when you have sort of 5 lead actors and 5 lead actresses, it gives the appearance of equality and equity, when in fact that equality and equity doesn't actually exist in the industry. But the other thing, and as you said, we don't have it for director or editor or anybody else, right? So it says, well, either we don't care about gender equity for any other role in filmmaking or television, or we think actually we're handling that some other way. And I think probably most of us think, no, actually we're not doing either one of those things.
We're like picking and choosing what feels best for what, which is not also creating equity.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
It's just not a system.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the thing, though, that it does that's kind of interesting to me from a conversational standpoint is that when we do see the best director nominees, there is a conversation about who's in this category, right? Why are they recognized? Who got left out? Who and why? By looking at the best actress nominees, we could say, why are they all white, right? So we could see racial bias. We do get to see certain things, right? We get to see the bias that's been built in. It becomes manifest when we're looking at that. So I guess that it's an interesting question then about how do we ensure that we're still looking, right? We're measuring, because it is a reflection, right, of what we're doing.
I don't know. To be honest, I feel like you can't really ensure that, because it comes from a space of, do you want to do the work or do you not? Mm-hmm. Like, it comes down to the CEOs of the company. Like, are you going to have representation? Sure, I'll put trans people in a film, I'll put black people in a film. And am I going to do that because I want a money grab, because, you know, there's a lot of shows, like there's a show on Broadway now that had a Wicked, like they've had their first Black Linda, and now everyone's talking about Wicked, oh my God, Wicked. When it's like there's been like years of this role being, there was literally
19
no
years.
reason why a Black person couldn't be playing Glinda. So, you know, and like, but now it's happening. It's like, oh my God, like we've forgotten about, like it's almost like we're getting gaslit of the trauma of like being, you know, completely gate kept out of these communities. So it's like, it comes down to, do I want to do the decolonizing work around who I am and how it affects the people around me? Do I want to constantly be in a space of questioning how I perpetuate violence in the place that I am in and how I can be better? And I don't know how you can really ensure that, and especially large companies like this, when most of the time the focus is set on money, you know? And who do you have in the room having these discussions? Oftentimes, the diversity inclusion person is a straight man. Like, I've had multiple straight men in the room who aren't discussing queerness in any type of element, who aren't really even breaking down race in a way that makes sense. Like, it's like, who's in the room consulting you? Who are you paying? You can't just grab any person and say, oh, they're POC, and so therefore they're qualified. Like, you have to literally do the work. Go to organizers, go to the right people in the right communities and employ them and have them call you out about what you need to be doing to be better.
And that's what I mean when I say investment, right? If you just grab your one GNC friend, right? Grab your one Black friend, what do you think? That is not a job qualification. And there are people who believe in essentialism, and I'm down with that. But plus, right, what is the organizing background, right? What kind of study have they been doing about this? How much time and strategy and structure have they put in place? And then, like, put the dollars there. If this is important to your business, it can't be, well, we just want to have them come and talk to us for an hour. No, there's somebody that has to always be in your writer's room, right? Several somebodies, actually. And it has to become a normalized part. That, like, difficult self-work that you're talking about just has to be an everyday occurrence, such that it's no longer difficult, such that we as a culture become at ease saying, is this the degree of representation that we like? And is it done in a way that is fair and gentle and loving and humane, and not just, well, we need to check some boxes? That level of investment and accountability is where the rubber meets the road, or it doesn't.
And it's not going to be comfortable.
Ever.
Sensitive, like it's not going to feel good. And I feel like people, oh, I want you to call me out, but do it in a way that's gentle and comfortable and doesn't hurt my feelings in the process. It's not really how anything happens in terms of growing, about understanding other cultures and other people around you. You're gonna fuck up. I don't know if I can curse here. You're gonna mess up, and you have to be able to, like, deal with that instead of getting mad. Like, people just really do not know how to deal with, like, you're wrong, and what are you going to do about it? That uncomfortable self-awareness and work.
Yeah, I think that's such a really great point. You also said something a minute ago, Mars, that I realized I had a reaction that brought up a question for me, which was, when you said that there's now a Black Glinda and Wicked, my first response, which my wife could tell you when she asked me the other day, and we went through the entire catalog of what's on Broadway at the moment, I was like, nope, musical, nope, musical, nope. Yeah, Tina. No, she'd already seen it. So, like, I'm going through, and I thought, Wicked, man, can we ever get something new going on, right? Had I known there was a Black, I actually might have gone.
She's still there, like.
Right? So, well, now, don't mention that, because now I might be stuck tomorrow going to a matinee of Wicked, but it might be worth it. I mean, I think one of the questions that I have for you all is, if we were transparent on who made the films that we're going to see, would it make a difference in consumer behavior, right? If you knew that, in fact, it was a diverse crew, and again, not everything needs to be. There are times that we're telling, you know, Black Panther isn't the time to have, you know, a mostly white cast, right? So there's times where we're telling cultural, we're telling stories of a particular culture. And that should, should be done the way it should be. But if otherwise, it's just a human story without any particular cultural relationship particularly, would that make a difference, do you think, for consumers? Would it make a difference for any of you if you knew, oh, actually that film had a really interesting, not just the people in front of the camera, but everybody that was involved in that film?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the person, though, and what Mars is saying of, like, are you willing to see past yourself? Like, if you don't see yourself, if there's a story about a young black woman who's, a teenager going through her coming-of-age years, but you're a cisgender white male and you don't necessarily see yourself, but you've been a teenager before, right? If you're not able to like look in and see that you have some way to connect to this story, then you're not going to see the importance of it, right? So it's about doing the work in order to see yourself in stories that don't necessarily look like you. And for me personally, I mean, being a black woman, like, of course, I care a lot about like who's behind the camera and in front of the camera, but that's because I am someone that's been marginalized during my life, right? But some people that have not been, may not see it that way. And so it's about, unfortunately, it's like you're not going to change everyone. So that's what's difficult in this, I think, as well. But hearing more from you too of like the stats around or around Gen Z, it's like generations of people that are moving more in that direction, right? And so, I think the more transparency too, I think if people did know more, like, I don't think always stories do share who their below the line team is. And I think with the generations that we have now that are consumers, that are watching content, if they knew more about them, that it would actually encourage them to see films that think about that as well. But
Yeah, I think that I would like to know, right? I think ultimately it come in the same way that corporations are starting to figure out, like, how do I actually make substantive adjustments in our operations so that we are more inclusive. I think everyday people are doing that too, right? And they're trying to make choices, particularly as consumers, that reflect their values. But there's just so much that happens in the wings, or so much that happens backstage that they're not aware of. I would be happy to watch an entirely cis male cast tell whatever story because that's appropriate if I knew, right, about different kinds of representation in other roles, right? Literally 90% of the jobs in entertainment don't land in front of the footlights, right? They aren't not in front of the camera. If I had that information, I would be a happier, more informed, and more empowered consumer, right? But is that what the industry wants? A consumer base that can hold them accountable?
Yeah, right.
And
Do they want it? Probably no, but are they going to get it? Is it coming? Is it here? Maybe not even is it coming. Is it already here? And they just are not going to realize it until they're really underwater, right? I mean, we still keep talking about this. I mean, it's a very interesting thing to me, this issue about even this question we're here to answer today. And I get I'm moderating, so I'm trying to limit my own personal perspective on it. But
get in there, Lisa.
one of the things that I find challenging is that the reason, especially in 70s feminism, which was so important for so many reasons, and every feminism that came after that, especially as it became to represent more and more women. But it's a valid thing to say, no, we can't just default to the male. So in literature, we don't want to just have male characters and assume, oh, but we know that means everybody. No, women were right to say, no, it does not mean everybody. It's not. To then say to a performer today, like Marcia, well, oh no, we get you, we welcome you. If you could just pick one of these two, we know that it includes you, and we want you to know it includes you. We'll put performer on the actual award when we give it to you, but you have to pick best, male or female. Like, we need to take these lenses that we've already learned from and apply them even when it's not comfortable. right, to your point, Mars, right, when it's not comfortable that we're still looking at these issues and we're still trying to figure out. And the thing that I'm really interested in, again, I'm sorry to bring this from a business lens, but it's relevant. There's a McKinsey study that was really interesting to me when they were looking at diversity measures within organizations and the question was, have you ever decided not to take a job because of perceived lack of inclusion? And the answer was the majority said yes, regardless of whether they were from a minority community or not, right? So we do know that people are looking and saying, I care about this issue, not just because it affects me in my life, right? But because it affects all of us. And so I think we are seeing people use their dollars once they have information to support the things that they care about, to bring voices. I think anyone who has seen a film in the last 10 years who couldn't have imagined that film being made 10 years prior understands the power of that, right? When we're like, whose stories are we telling?
Yeah.
And I'm tired of watching a film or a show and having to do the translation about what human thread is there for me because I don't see anybody like me in this production, right? Well, part of growing in our humanity is that experience, right, of sort of seeing people and trying to figure out and then connecting because we have human stories that transcend many of these aspects of identity because we do have commonality, even though we also have important differences.
I also feel like the whole relatable, we talked about this before, like the relatable thing can be stupid because I'm like, because it's like something should be made, like something should be made by Black people for a Black audience. Like if there's an all-white football movie I'm not watching it, and I'm fine with that, and it's for who it's meant for. I don't understand why we can't have things meant for certain people and have it cross whoever it makes sense to in the process. But it's like, when speaking on the diversity thing behind closed doors, like intentionality behind the doors is a big difference to me. Like I know the writer isn't someone who's completely not involved with this existence, but is like, oh, I'm going to be the savior and write about this existence while I have had no understanding of it at all, but I'm going to write a story in the process.
It shows up in the work too, right? I mean, so I cannot say enough about the enormous privilege and entitlement of expecting the whole roster of entertainment available in the world to be reflective of you. Like, how cushy must your life have been?
Watching everything
that, like,
on
that, yeah, you are not watching all of Netflix, I promise. Get a job. But and now I've lost my
The importance of authenticity when it comes to...
it shows up in the work. And your audience feels it. And maybe not the audience with the same identity as you, but the audience knows when those words just don't come out of people's mouths in that order in this culture. Or like, it is better for your output overall, right? The universality of stories is in their specificity, right? God or the devil or whomever you like is in the details. And one of the most important parts about running a successful business is delegating to the right people.
Well, I would just say too, it comes down to, again, we keep coming to some of the same things, but accountability. I mean, for us at the Gotham, yes, we have the Gotham Awards, but we do a lot of emerging storytellers, like early work through labs and some of our other programs. And so we think a lot about, like, when we do, here's your application, it's a lot of like, are you the right person to be telling this story? Like, how do you like making sure that this story comes from a place of authenticity. Because even again, if you're putting the story out and someone watches it that's maybe not part of your same community, but they're gonna know, like, if it's, or even part of your community, they're gonna know if that's an authentic story. And so that's huge and really important. And then we've talked about this too, of like, then who are the people that are evaluating these stories? Like we do a lot of work of, like, to the reviewer, ask yourself, like, does this seem authentic to you? Like, does this storyteller have a connection? Like, how does this impact, like, what are your biases around this topic? Things like that are really important, and those are the stories that, get made and that people see. So just to reiterate that.
All right, well, I know if we have any questions, I don't want to make sure that we're not we certainly have time for a few questions. If anyone's interested, if you want to step up to the mic, thank you for showing our assistant there. If you like to, otherwise, we'll continue talking, but as soon as I see somebody that has a question, oh, all right, we have a question.
I have a question. Hi, this has been wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here. I have 2 quick questions. So, Mars, you talked in the beginning a little bit about, it almost seemed like really totally decolonizing awards. And that like, even if there were categories for you to see yourself, maybe they don't fully represent like the artistic process. I'm interested, are you of the mind of, is there a kind of awards that you would want to see? Or are you kind of like, we don't need these in our lives?
I really, my personal opinion for me is that I don't need awards. When I break down awards, like a lot of it, especially if I'm talking about big time awards, are based in like clout and decolonizing clout. I feel like awards can be incredibly classist. I know so many people around me who don't have big budgets and have beautiful films, and they're not even going to be included in that conversation. It's just omitting so many groups of people who have brilliant art. And I feel like it can be wildly oppressive. So if we're taking away the hierarchy from awards, what really is it doing at the end of the way? I feel like a lot of the big parts of awards is its exclusiveness. Oh my God, is its exclusiveness, exclusivity. You know, like you are a part of the club, and you know those strong 6 were nominated. Doesn't include like the thousands of other artists across America who are making art. So I feel like once you take the hierarchy away, there's not really much power in it if you take the clout out of the purpose. I think, so that's my personal opinion. I've always said I would rather community give me the praise that I need and community recognize me versus these people on a panel doing that, you know, who often are white and cis and straight, giving me, I'm like, what is that award giving me that I already didn't know and community couldn't give me? So that's where I sit in that space.
Yeah, awards kind of got ruined for me when I realized that bigger budget movies have people that are paid to advocate for them to get
That's
awards.
what I used to do, so sorry.
Oof, sorry. Actually, I had a quick question for you too. And for the Gotham, I have always been so curious if award shows have ever thought to just break it up by genre, like best comedic performance, best, you know, I know that the Golden Globes has like drama and comedy, but their comedies are just dramas they didn't like as much. But is that something you'd be interested in doing?
Well, from a practical standpoint, it would make a show that's already pretty long, very, very long. I'm not gonna lie. This year, even adding those additional categories, it made it longer, and we had more tributes this year. But also, then I think there's a possibility of exclusion with that, in that there's genres that we don't even, but there's genres we don't even know about, right? Like especially in independent filmmaking, there's genres that are brand new that exist, and then there's genres that cross different components, you know, that we would be kind of leaving out in that way. So for the Gotham, it doesn't necessarily make sense for us. But.
Thank you. Thanks for your question.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi. So a follow-up question on awards. I'm not like an awards person. I don't like competition. I don't want to foster it. But in a time of information overload, awards are really helpful for helping you know where to put your attention, right? Like what should I watch of the 7,000 things that came out this past year? So what else do we use? What would be another way for us to kind of surface like really fantastic art that was showing us like what we wanted to see? How do we do that?
Well, I think it's interesting what Mars brought up around community, or I would call it audience, right? Like if audience had opportunities to kind of say like, here's the best films, because other than awards, I'm sure it's like you ask your friends, what did you just see that I should see, right? Because you trust them and all that. So I don't know if that, to be honest, I don't know if that exists. I mean, there's of course like Rotten Tomatoes is based off of critics. I don't think there's a real like audience generated. I mean, there's review that you can like sometimes see reviews from other people, but I would think,
It's not really audience or community.
yeah, it's not really audience or community based. It's like someone should create that. Maybe we just thought of a new idea, guys.
The thing that is available now, though, is the art critic, right? And I think that there is so much value in that role in a community. I think it has been warped in a lot of ways to the benefit of commercialism and white supremacy. But right, if the critic is doing what we learned they should be doing in Ratatouille, right? Then that is a really great way to access, like, what are the stories that are right for me or that I might be interested in. But in the same way that everybody else has to do their self-work too, right? The critics have some self-work to do.
I was gonna say critics, it gets a little complicated, right? Because I think a lot of critics too right now, depending on what outlet they're at, there might be other areas that are influencing whether, I'm not gonna say exactly, but like the publicist in me is like, wait, what are you saying? You have to, they might be influenced by what they're picking. So then I think it comes down to, if you do go the critics route, it's like, find a critic you one, know that they're doing their work, like they seem like someone based on their background, what outlets they've wrote for, what types of review, when they're writing their review, what are they looking at within that review, and follow them, right? Because critics overall, I think there's a lot of interesting things.
That's why my
to
answer
navigate.
is yes and, right? That at this point, every single aspect of this industry has some serious work to do in terms of understanding its own biases and checking and countering them. But at least there is a possibility, right, for more accountability to the community in that position. But yeah, I don't, that's what's available, but I can't think of what is better right now, although I'm sure that something could be.
I feel like organizers, like people who do organizing work, would have a better answer than this. But like bouncing off of that, like I feel like community has to be the answer, because critics like can come from the most oppressive mind spaces. Like there's this big thing happening on Broadway now where like Black shows on Broadway, critics are giving like bad reviews, like consistently. And it's like, while community is loving it, I'm thinking of like the Michael Jackson musical that's happening right now. Community, like everybody, it's a huge show. It's sold out every night. Everyone loves it. I mean, like multiple Black musicals on Broadway have been open and are getting like bad reviews, like because the spaces, like I'm thinking about like Black No More, like different musicals that I've been in of Black shows, Tina, bad reviews, like New York Times gave most of the Black shows I've been in awful reviews, and most Black shows that were on Broadway did not get great reviews. Like it's been because the people who are critiquing it are coming from a super oppressive space and have no want to really understand the culture. Like Michael Jackson is different because there's a lot of things in that. But like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's a problem in terms of like who's reviewing the work and then who's referencing the work because they have no interest in it in the first place.
This is some of you bring up such a great point too, because, and it seems like, so if I'm in the industry, what I'm looking at is what are the trends that are going to impact our ability to make money, right? Their businesses, that's what they're trying to figure out. We went to a play, I'm looking at my niece and my wife because they're both here. We went to a play last time, pre-pandemic. What was it? It was that Bette Midler thing. She was great. Hello, Dolly. Now, what was really funny is my daughter, who's also in her 20s, and my niece, who's in her 20s, and then a bunch of older white women all saw the play. And all of the white women were like, this play is fantastic. And Bette Midler was great, and there were a lot of beautiful costumes. I mean, there were a lot of great things. My niece and my daughter left going, what the hell was that? Like, there was just so many things that were offensive. Then I just started laughing because this is what happened, right? There was this split. And I thought, that might work. Hello Dolly might work today for like another half a minute. But that is not what the generations that we're trying to get in the theater, and by the way, to also watch the award shows, that we want them to care about. We are becoming irrelevant and don't realize it. So the question is, can the industry become relevant in a way that's meaningful for the future, right? While honoring the very real issues that we've all been talking about how do we get there? And I think one of the tremendous opportunities in a time of significant social change is this beautiful moment as an opportunity for reflection. So we don't just default into using the same tools again and again and now trying to reapply them, but to actually stop and say, hey, wait a minute, what would true inclusion look like? What would true diversity look like? How would we measure that so it's not just a numbers game, but we really do appreciate that we're trying to create something here that is important. And it isn't a standard answer all the time. It's not one answer. It's 1,000 different answers maybe, right? And I'm just curious. So maybe we have only a few minutes. Maybe I'll use that as the segue to the final question I have for each of you, which is, you have a magic wand. You get one change that you can make. You know it's going to happen, but it's only one. What's the change that you would make today for the industry that you want to see?
One, Lisa.
That's it, one, I know.
Two, just two.
Please.
Just two.
All right, one.
Two
all right,
that are quick. Two that are
Two.
quick. Just
All
quick,
right,
quick.
there we go.
Okay.
All right.
So let's see. The first for me is, right, because this is a business, equitable pay.
Okay.
And transparency, not only around that, like just a world of transparency about who's doing what jobs and how well or not they are being compensated. Because that, equitable pay lets people who are marginalized move more strongly in the industry, right? And transparency lets the audience back them on that by saying, I don't buy that ticket because you're not where I would like for my hard-earned dollar to go. So those are my two.
All right. Thanks, Bliss.
I would say decolonization. My magic wand is the minds are decolonized in the rooms and outside the rooms, because I feel like that will trickle into everything else, like decolonizing classism, fat phobia, transphobia, colorism, like really doing that work, because it'll affect paying Black people, paying POC, paying Black trans people and queer people what they are owed for their work. It will affect everything in terms of representation. I feel like doing the actual work, going to therapy, asking yourself the right questions about those around you, and understanding your own privileges and what that means about you and how you move throughout the world is what my magic wand spell.
Thanks, Mars.
You just brought up a point that I kind of changed what I was saying earlier around just relevancy and because of course at the Gotham, with Gotham Awards, we're not broadcast anywhere, but we think about who would watch this, and of course the Oscars and all those places, and so I think it's about who's in those top roles that are, or in those decision-making roles, being very much intentional about having a diverse team in those decision-making roles that then impact what people see and how people kind of, interact in this industry. Because I feel very, blessed that I'm second in line at the Gotham. That's, I think for these types of organizations, it's kind of a big deal. So having, providing more opportunities for people of color, people from various backgrounds to be able to do that, I think is huge. And then what I was thinking earlier was just around network building and just the importance of not a lot of people that do come from marginalized communities having someone that's in the industry to take them along for the ride with them. And it's so much nepotism is never going away. We can think it's going away, but it's not. We were talking, I'm going to do nepotism to my child.
Absolutely. Yes. Why do you think I got it too?
You get these connections for nothing.
I just moved to
Bliss told
Harlem
me to
and I
do
bought
this.
a 2-bedroom apartment just so I could have the nieces and nephews that are no, I came to New York to be an artist and I just live for free on my auntie's bedroom. Yes.
I mean, but like, hello.
it.
So Bliss gave me permission earlier, so I'm gonna do it. But just that importance of bringing people along for the ride, I think, is huge because it's so much about who you know. Like every job that you have, whether you're in the film industry or not, honestly, comes down to who you know. And I think it's also actually, one more. It's just around like skill building, like having the skills to network. Like you may not have a rich auntie that's in the industry.
She ain't rich.
But if you know. But if you know how to speak, if you know how to meet Bliss at an event or a party, like because someone taught you about networking and how to communicate with people, Bliss might help. Like she's going to help you get that job, right? So I think it comes down to those three things. So I know, I'm sure I snuck in that third one, but I had to. It just was.
I'm glad you did. You got to move and shake around here.
That's right. Oh. Oh, great. Sorry.
Hi, so sorry. I didn't know if we had time, but I just wanted to briefly discuss one issue that we just spoke about, which was representation on screen versus behind the scenes, and how that visibility, like spaces are carved out, whether the representation is where we want it to be or the quality of representation is where we want it to be. Those spaces are carved out like for women and for people of color, at least some of the time. And I was just wondering how we might incorporate that visibility into behind the scenes, both stage and in the film industry. Yeah, that's my question.
If I could add one
A
thing,
doozy
and
one.
again with a statistic, because I just read this one and I was so struck by it, which was, it was a survey of Gen Z, and they were by far, beyond the binary, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting was they said more than maybe 25, 26% said, well, that not only because they were saying, well, we sort of know more than our parents, but they were saying, but we don't know that much either. And 25 or 26% said they look to television and film to better understand their lives and the lives of others, especially around issues of queerness. At least that was the question for this audience. And I think it's not a small thing. It's a really big thing that all of us see people, right? To imagine ourselves in these roles, I think is part of it. To see ourselves as part of this humanity. And I'm just curious how we do, the representation in front of the camera makes a difference. The representation behind the camera makes a difference. And so, yeah, great question. Appreciate your patience in asking it. Thank you.
I feel like that comes down to the hiring department at the end of the day. Because, like, are you willing to hire women and marginalized people and trans people and black people and blah, 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 or are you not?
And after you hire them, are you going to do the things that you need to do to make sure that they succeed? Yeah. And that means being safe. That means having the network around them. That means having the specific skill set and like ongoing development. I mean, there are a lot of options at play in terms of making sure that you have a diverse team backstage. And it's actually a lot easier than with stage performers or people who are in front of the camera, because that like First Amendment freedom of I get to choose thing is out of the way. Like, so actually how you look doesn't have anything to do with how well you do your job. So it's much easier in that space to make it more diverse, right? And Google is free and we can do it. It's just a matter of deciding you're going to do it.
That question, people, there's things that like people will say, oh, I don't know anyone that's, I don't know any women. I don't know a person, or I don't know where to find them. It's like, it's not real.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like the places that aren't hiring the right people are intentionally doing it at this point, because it's like the resources are there. So they're not in the spaces because you don't want them to be in the spaces.
Recruiters are like banging down doors, right? Universities they understand that this is a more and more valuable input, and we have to take it very seriously.
The athletic department does it. They go to the communities and they find the talent. They don't care where your background is. I mean, that's all money based, but Yeah.
So it is, in fact, with those who are not performers, it's a much simpler prospect It's just a matter of making the effort. And, I just totally lost my train of thought here. Oh, the other thing is that we as consumers of art don't understand that most of the jobs are not the ones that we see, right? So we could be better about letting people understand that a whole community came together and made this, and if the art speaks to you, you don't have to be on screen doing it. The hair and makeup department has as much artistry, right, as set dressing as anybody else.
Classism.
Amen.
Or classist around how they socialize, like the people backstage. It's awful.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, I mean, part of what we talked about is, and Gotham's doing a great job of creating programs to get people in. Mars, you've spoken to this as well, but once you get there, if there are so many barriers to success and the weight of that, it makes it very difficult. On the other hand, if they feel respected and valued, they're more likely to also refer people that they know, which is the other part of nepotism is like, yeah, use your network to create that. And how do we do it? And like we were talking earlier about Halle Berry in that interview where I was just so struck by the fact that she said after she won the Academy Award, and everyone, all these white actors who she was talking to, because it was the podcast I was listening to, were like, oh, you must have had all these opportunities. And she says, nothing. Like nothing came to me. And so then she realized, well, I got to just figure out my own path forward because, yeah, I mean, we just weren't getting anything. And I think that's not uncommon, right? We've got to build the pipeline, but we also have to create the environments in which people can flourish, in which they belong, not just in words, but in feeling and in action.
To have the community to support you while you're in, community, not only, as I was saying earlier, community of, people that came before you to bring you along, but your community of peers. Like peers are so important in this as well, because it helps you navigate, like, what did you go through? What am I going through? How can I give you tips from my personal experience? Like, that's so huge as well, I would say.
All right, well, I think we are
keep going
out
for
of
a
time.
very
I
long
know.
Let's go.
And I would love to talk to the three of you, as long as you'd let me. So it's probably a good thing there's an actual time limit. Anyway, thank you so much. First of all, thank you for everyone being here. Thank you to all the people watching at home. And thank you most of all to Bliss and Mars and Kia for not only being here today, but for the incredible work you're doing. And you are
Thank you,
making
Lisa.
a huge
You're
difference.
amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here.